Hey guys, and welcome back. My name is MrCaproni, and this is your ACT Prep. Now today we are doing the second basics of trig video, where we're going to be looking at the three reciprocal functions for trig. Now we're going to go through the same labeling process we did in the first video. So if you haven't checked that video out yet, you should go ahead and look above and click on that. But if you have already seen that video, we're going to do pretty much the same thing, but with our three new trig functions. So first off, what's the name of these three trig functions? We call them the reciprocal functions, and you'll find out why in a second. But they are called cosecant, secant, and cotangent. Now, it may seem weird that I put them in that order, but it's because it's going to align with the same order we covered the trig functions in the last video. So last video, we did talk about sine first, where we said that was the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse side. Well, the reason that these are called reciprocal functions is because it's actually just the reciprocal of the sine function, which means it's essentially a new fraction with one on top and the old fraction on the bottom. So remember, that old sine fraction was just the opposite over the hypotenuse. So in reality, what we're saying is cosecant is just 1 over the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. Now, if you know anything about dividing fractions, if you divide by a fraction on the bottom of a fraction, you're actually just able to multiply by it flipped upside down, called the reciprocal. So again, we're just going to go ahead and flip that bottom fraction upside down. And when you multiply that by 1, anything times 1 is just itself. So you just end up with hypotenuse over opposite. So in other words, the cosecant trig function is at the end of the day just your hypotenuse length divided by your opposite length. As you can see, it fits in with the same type of diagram we were working before, and you'd be able to use these same functions in your calculator. This brings us to our second reciprocal function, which is based off the cosine as its original. Now remember, the cosine was adjacent over hypotenuse, the side lengths touching your theta angle. Now again, to look at the reciprocal of cosine, we call this the secant trig function, and it's just 1 over cosine. And remember, we just looked that cosine was the adjacent over hypotenuse. So in reality, we're looking at 1 over adjacent over hypotenuse. Now, just like before, we're able to flip that upside down and multiply by 1 to just give us a final answer of hypotenuse over adjacent. So the secant trig function is hypotenuse over adjacent. The last one we have is going to be based off of tangent. So when we're looking at the tangent function, it was originally the opposite over adjacent. And the reciprocal function of tangent is called cotangent. Now, when we're looking at cotangent, we're going to follow the same steps as before. 1 divided by our original tangent function, which was opposite over adjacent. Now, once we are at this step, we can again flip it upside down, multiply by 1, and you get the answer of adjacent over opposite. So when we look at this back on the graph for our last one, cotangent is just the adjacent side length divided by the opposite side length. And when we're dealing with our calculator problems, they will usually have these three trig functions as well as our original 3. If they don't, you could always just do 1 divided by the original 3 to get to these reciprocal functions. Well, there you have it, guys. Those are your 3 reciprocal functions. And we have now learned how to label all 6 of the trig functions. These are the 6 trig functions. There aren't 7 or 8. There aren't any mystery ones coming up later. These 6 are what the whole idea of trigonometry is based around. Now, once we move on from here, we're going to be looking at our next video on how the graphs of these 6 trig functions come to be, and kind of talk about what they can be used for and how we can learn to interpret them. So I hope you'll join me for that video and for all my future videos by hitting the subscribe button below. Also, if you learned anything new in this video, please hit the like button and help a guy out. With that said, remember, my name is MrCaproni, and this has been your ACT Prep.